The veil hit the floor before the vows were spoken. Valentina Reese was 31 years old, black and beautiful. A woman who had walked into Kang Min-jae's world as his personal executive secretary and stayed because she was the only person in 3 floors of dangerous men who had never once looked at him with fear. She had earned every diamond, every penthouse window, every chauffeured mile, and she had earned the right to stand in this hall with her father on her arm and her mother crying in the front row. She had earned the altar. Then Madame Kang stood up. In front of 300 witnesses, she accused Valentina of selling secrets to a rival family. An aunt distributed forged documents to the nearest rows. Another aunt crossed the aisle and tore the cathedral veil from Valentina's head. Valentina's father, 76 years old, in his rented navy suit, nearly fell. Valentina did not scream. She did not fight. She picked up the hem of her gown and walked out, and in the chaos that followed, one man moved against the crowd. Not toward the exits, not toward the altar, toward the floor. Toward the veil that had been thrown there like trash. But what happened inside that hall after the doors closed? What Kang Min-jae, the man they call the architect, did next? That is the part no one expected. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a member and help our channel. The pearl comb went in on the 3rd try. The stylist's hands were steady. Valentina's weren't. She watched herself in the long mirror and told herself the trembling was cold, because the bridal suite had been air-conditioned too aggressively, and she'd forgotten to ask them to adjust it. That was the story she was telling. The truth was something else. Across the room, her father sat in the corner chair with his hat on his knee. Clarence Reese was 76 years old and wore a dark navy suit that was not his. It was rented, pressed by a woman at a dry cleaner's 3 blocks from his apartment, and it fit him better than anything he'd owned in decades. He was turning the hat slowly in his hands. He had been doing it for 20 minutes. "Daddy," Valentina said. He looked up. She didn't say anything else. He nodded once, the way he always nodded, slow, precise, like a man confirming something he already knew. Her mother, Gloria, stood near the window in her pale blue dress with the pearl brooch. She had not stopped crying since the first veil pin went in. She cried in the way people who spent their whole lives getting things done cry. Silently, without wiping, as if the tears were simply weather. Valentina looked at her own reflection. The cathedral veil fell behind her in a clean white cascade. The gown was ivory satin with a lace overlay that had cost more than her father had made in any single year of his life. She knew the exact number. She had not told him. This was the thing about Valentina's life that nobody quite understood. Not the women at the Kang organization events who watched her arrive. Not the people who had known her as Min-jae's secretary before everything changed. Not even Min-jae himself, who understood most things. The luxury was never what she'd wanted. She'd wanted this. Her father turning his hat. Her mother standing at the window, in the dress she'd bought herself with money saved from her pension. She had wanted them to see her here, not as someone who'd gotten lucky, not as a secretary who'd climbed into the boss's life, but as a woman who had been chosen, deliberately, by a man who knew exactly who she was. For 2 years she had lived in a penthouse in the financial district and traveled in a chauffeured Mercedes and worn clothes that cost more than her mother's car. She had done it without losing the Sunday visits, without losing the grocery bags. She carried herself, so her parents never felt the distance. She had earned her way into Min-jae's trust with precision and loyalty and the capacity to keep her face neutral in rooms full of dangerous men. He had fallen in love with that capacity. She had accepted it, and she had arrived at this morning, believing that the final piece was the simplest. Her parents watching her become his wife. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 1:45, a knock at the door. She walked the aisle on her father's arm. The Hanyang Grand Hall was everything the planner had promised. White orchids banked against walls of dark lacquered wood, gold paper lanterns suspended in rows from the ceiling, the low sound of a string quartet. The rows were full. Minjai's world, organization lieutenants in impeccable suits, business partners she had once coordinated meetings for, relatives she had learned to read for danger before she learned their names. On the left side of the aisle, her family, cousins, her aunt from Memphis, 2 women she'd worked alongside before all of this. And in the front row, the chair where Gloria had been sitting, which was now empty. Because Gloria was standing, both hands pressed to her mouth. Minjae was at the altar, charcoal suit, the serpent tattoo visible on the right side of his neck. Sang. No expression she could read, which meant the expression was being controlled. She had learned, over 2 years, that his absence of expression was not absence of feeling. It was feeling so concentrated it had nowhere to go. His eyes found hers the moment she appeared at the end of the aisle. He didn't move. She was halfway down when she became aware that the quartet had gone quiet. The ceremony officiant said something in Korean, then in English. He asked the guests to be seated. Most had not stood. Then Madame Kang Sukyeon rose from the right-hand front row. She was wearing jade green. She rose the way a woman who has rehearsed a moment rises, slowly, with grief already built into her posture. She pressed one hand to her chest. She said she was sorry. She said she had received information she could not ignore. She said that a woman who had agreed to pass internal documents to the Seo family. Minjai's primary rivals could not stand at this altar without the family knowing. The hall went very still. Valentina heard her own breathing. Aunt Kang Mi soon moved from her seat and began distributing envelopes to the nearest rows. Photographs, a printed bank transfer record. Valentina recognized her own name in the header of the document. She had never seen that document before in her life. Minjae stepped forward from the altar. His mother raised her voice for the first time. The first time Valentina had ever heard the woman raise her voice, and said he was blinded, that love had made him a fool, that the family's name required. Aunt Kang Hai-jin reached Valentina before anyone else did. The veil came off in one pull. The pearl comb hit the floor and skittered under a chair. A sound from the front row. Gloria. A single sharp sound, like something tearing. Valentina's father tried to reach her. He was 76, and his body moved the way a man's body moves when it is trying to do something it can no longer fully do. He didn't fall. He came close. The hall erupted. Minjai's men moved to contain the rows. Valentina's cousins were on their feet. Voices in Korean and English collided above the flowers and the lanterns. Valentina stood in the center of it and looked at the floor. Then she bent, picked up the hem of her gown, and walked out. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She didn't look at Minjae, who stood at the altar watching her leave. She walked out because she knew, with complete certainty, that if she stayed one more second in that room, something in her would break, that she would never get back. The hall was still erupting when June Park stopped moving. He had been positioned near the western wall during the ceremony, his usual post, close enough to the aisle to reach whatever needed reaching. He had watched Madame Kang rise. He had watched Hai-jin cross the aisle. He had watched the veil come off and the pearl comb skip across the floor. Now he was the only person in the room moving in the wrong direction. Everyone else pressed toward the exits, toward Minjae, toward each other. June moved toward the floor. He reached the spot where Valentina had been standing, crouched, and picked up the veil. He folded it. The way a man folds something that belongs to someone else, that is not his to damage, and draped it over his left forearm. He stood at the edge of the crowd. Minjae had not moved from the altar. Through the chaos of standing guests and raised voices and Valentina's cousins trying to push toward the front, he was motionless. His eyes moved from June's face to the veil on June's arm, then to the corridor door that had swung shut after Valentina. Something passed between them. Not a word, not a signal. The particular silence of 2 men who have worked together long enough that communication has become almost involuntary. Minjae turned to the nearest security post. 4 words in Korean. The hall doors closed, heavy lacquered wood against brass fittings. Several guests near the exits protested. No one opened the doors again. Min-jae walked to the side of the hall, where the event coordinator stood, her expression a careful, professional blank. He said something in her ear. She hesitated for exactly 1 second before she handed him her tablet. He walked to the center of the hall. "Sit down," he said, not loud. It didn't need to be. The hall sat. He passed the tablet to his security lead, who crossed to the audiovisual panel at the back wall, the ceremonial screen above the altar, which had been displaying a rotating arrangement of photographs, their 2 faces in white frames against cream. Went dark. Then it filled with footage. The timestamp in the upper corner read 22 days prior. The location was identifiable to anyone who had spent time in the Kang Capital Group's administrative offices. The 7th floor, west wing, the hallway leading to the section that had been Valentina's. Her desk was visible in the upper right of the frame. The tall windows behind it, the row of filing cabinets she had kept meticulously organized. Madame Kang Suk-yeon walked into frame. Behind her, Hae-jin and Mi-soon. They moved with the ease of people who believed the building was not watching them. The recording was 23 minutes long. Min-jae played 8 minutes of it. In those 8 minutes, Madame Kang opened Valentina's former desk with a key she should not have had. Mi-soon removed 3 folders and placed them in a cloth bag. Hae-jin stood at the hallway corner. Then, near the end of the clip, a man entered through the side door, thin, late 40s, green jacket. He sat at the desk and opened a laptop. He stayed for 4 minutes. When he left, he was carrying an envelope that had not been there when he arrived. Min-jae knew his name. He had terminated the man's employment at Kang Capital 6 months ago. The severance had been generous. Apparently not generous enough. The screen went dark. The hall was completely silent for the first time since Madame Kang had stood. She had not moved from her seat. Her face was the face of a woman who had staked everything on a single moment and was now watching the calculation fail in front of 300 people. She looked. And this was the thing Valentina's family would remember when they talked about it later. She looked, for the first time, old. "I did it for you," she said. Quiet, controlled still even now. "I did it to protect." No, Min-jae was not looking at her. His voice had the same weight it always had, the weight of a man who does not raise his pitch because he does not need to. "You did it because you believed my love needed your permission." Aunt Mi-soon began to say something. He held up one hand. The room watched. His security lead moved to Madame Kang's row. The aunts attempted resistance, voices rising, hands reaching for sleeves and armrests, Madame Kang saying things about family and blood and what the guests would remember of tonight. Hae-jin gripped Mi-soon's arm. The words came faster as the 3 women were guided toward the side door. The service entrance, not the main doors, which was a particular kind of precision that the people in the hall who understood these things would recognize. Min-jae did not watch them leave. He was already walking toward the main hall doors, the ones that led to the marble corridor, the ones Valentina had walked through 11 minutes ago. June fell into step behind him. The veil, still folded, was still on his arm. At the doors, Min-jae stopped. He reached out, and June understood, placed the veil in his hands without being asked. Min-jae held it a moment, looking at the fabric, at the pearl comb someone had retrieved from under the chair and pressed into the fold. Then he pushed the doors open and walked into the corridor. The sound hit them immediately. Someone crying. Not loudly. The specific quiet of a woman who has been crying for a long time and no longer has the breath for volume. June stopped at the threshold and let the doors close behind him. He could see Valentina 30 feet away. On the floor against the wall, ivory gowns spread across the marble, her father beside her, her mother standing above them both. She had not looked up when the doors opened. She was looking at the middle distance of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. Min-jae walked toward her. Valentina had stopped walking when she reached the center of the corridor. It was not a decision. Her feet simply stopped, somewhere between the hall doors and the elevator bank, and her body understood before her mind did that there was nowhere she particularly needed to be. The train of the gown spread across the marble behind her. She gathered it slowly, pressing the fabric against her legs, and sat down against the wall. The corridor was pale marble and white light and very quiet. The noise from the hall was muffled behind the closed doors, voices in Korean. Something crashing, the elevated pitch of a woman she recognized. She did not process any of it. She sat with her back against the cold wall and her hands in her lap, and the top of her head where the veil had been, which felt like an open question, like a word with the last syllable missing. Her father found her. He came through the service door on the left side of the corridor, the one the event coordinator used for vendors and staff, which meant someone had told him exactly where to go. He was still holding his hat. He moved down the corridor with the deliberate pace of a man carrying something fragile inside himself and unwilling to drop it. He sat beside her on the floor. He was 76 years old and sitting on a marble floor in a rented suit. And he did it without hesitation, without commentary, without taking a moment to assess whether the floor was clean or whether the suit would suffer. He sat beside her because she was on the floor, and that was where he was supposed to be. Her mother arrived less than a minute later. Gloria could not sit on the floor in her church dress, not with her knees, which had been a problem since the fall 2 years ago. So she stood with her back against the wall and cried the way she had been crying all morning, quietly, without wiping. The pale blue blazer shook slightly at the shoulders. No one spoke for a while. The white orchids in the tall display vase near the elevator bank looked wrong now, the way all decorative things look wrong when something real is happening around them. The flowers were doing their job. The job had become irrelevant. Valentina looked at them and thought, who ordered those? And then remembered that she had 2 months ago, sitting across from a wedding planner in a sunlit office, choosing between white orchids and cream peonies, not knowing that this was the corridor the orchids would end up in, not the hall, the corridor. She thought about the mirror in the bridal suite, her father turning his hat in the corner chair, the thing she had come to this building wanting. Not the ceremony, not the hall, not the 300 guests who would speak about Min-jae's taste and Min-jae's loyalty and Min-jae's organization. Her, seen by the 2 people who had never required her to perform anything. She had been chosen, and then she had been thrown from an aisle. She thought, those 2 things can coexist. Then she thought, I don't want them to. It's over, she said. Her voice was steady. She heard it and was mildly surprised by it. The way you are surprised by your own handwriting when you haven't seen it in a while, recognizing the shape of it, finding it foreign nonetheless. Baby, her father said, I won't go back to an altar where my mother watched them treat me like garbage. She looked straight ahead at the orchids. Not for anyone. Gloria made a sound. Clarence did not argue. He had never argued his daughter out of a decision she made with her eyes open. He had raised her to make decisions that way, and arguing now would be a betrayal of every lesson he'd given her, a betrayal of the exact thing he was most proud of. He held her hands. His hands were large and rough from decades of maintenance work. Fixing things with his hands, the specific roughness of a man who had repaired hallways and boilers and his daughter's first bicycle and never once asked to be thanked for it. His hands over hers was the most familiar weight in her life. It was the weight that had carried her through the first job interview, through the first time she understood what Min-jae's business actually was. Through the night she called her parents and said she was in love, and her father had said, very calmly, tell me about him, and listened for 40 minutes without speaking. She looked at his face, the deep lines at the corners of his eyes, which had been there as long as she could remember, the silver of his close-cropped hair, the navy suit, pressed 3 blocks away by a woman who probably didn't know whose daughter was getting married today. She had not cried. She noted this without pride or surprise. There would be time for that later. In some room that was not this one, with no one watching. The tears were there. She could feel the exact location of them, somewhere behind the steadiness. But they were waiting, from behind the closed hall doors, a deeper silence than before. Then, faintly, the controlled murmur of a single voice. She knew the pitch of it. 2 years of anticipating that voice, in meeting rooms, in corridors, in the back of cars, had written it into a part of her that did not require conscious recognition. Her father turned his head slightly without releasing her hands. "He's going to come out," he said. Not a question. Valentina looked at the elevator bank, the brass of the doors, her own reflection in the closed panels, distorted but unmistakable, ivory gown, bare head, her mother standing above her. "I know," she said. "That doesn't mean you have to go back. I know." She turned to look at him. 76 years old, rented suit, shoes polished this morning by his own hands. "I know, Daddy." The hall doors opened. He came through the doors alone. June Park was behind him, close enough to be a shadow, and the veil was still in Minjai's hands, held carefully, the cathedral length of it folded over both forearms. Minjai walked into the corridor the way he walked into rooms he had not been invited into. Without hesitation, without looking at anything he did not need to look at, he walked to where Valentina was and he stopped. She was still on the floor against the wall. Her father's hands were over hers. Her mother stood above them both, with her arms crossed over her blazer. Her eyes moving between her daughter and the man approaching. Minjai lowered himself to the floor. Not the careful crouch of a man protecting his suit, both knees on the cold marble, deliberately, so that his face was level with hers. The platinum watch caught the corridor light. The black serpent tattoo was visible on the right side of his neck. Sing. And she noticed that he had not looked away from her since the moment he appeared in the doorway. He had the veil across his forearms. "I didn't come to ask you to forget," he said. His voice was low, directed entirely at her, as if the corridor and her parents and the marble floor and the distant sound of the sealed hall did not exist. "I came to show you they are no longer between us." She held his gaze. "My mother saw," Valentina said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he lowered his head, not in defeat, in the specific acknowledgement of a man who understands that some damage cannot be argued away. It can only be witnessed. Then he stood. He turned to her parents. Clarence had not moved from the floor beside her. He looked up at Minjai with the expression of a man who has spent 7 decades deciding who deserves what, and was still deciding. Gloria had straightened against the wall. Her hands were clasped in front of her blazer. She was not crying anymore. Minjai bowed. Not the abbreviated nod of social formality. The full, formal bow, deep, sustained, both hands at his sides, the kind that carries weight in Korean tradition, precisely because it cannot be shortened in the middle. He held it for several seconds. The serpent on his neck was visible above the white collar. He said, "I failed to protect your daughter inside my own house. I understand if she does not come back, but I need you to know that everyone who stood between her and this marriage has been removed. Whatever happens now, that is the truth." Gloria looked at Valentina. Clarence looked at Valentina. Minjai straightened. The corridor was very quiet. Then Clarence Reese, slowly, with the unhurried movements of a man who is past the age where hurrying helps anything, reached over and took his daughter's hand. He held it. He looked at her, not at Minjai, as if the man were not present, as if this moment were only for the two of them, the way all the important ones had been. "You don't need to come back for him," he said. "Only come back if it's for yourself." The corridor was quiet. Valentina looked at the veil, the cathedral length of ivory satin across Minjai's forearms. The pearl comb, retrieved from under a chair. Someone had found it and pressed it into the fold, the weight of it, which she knew because she had felt it for 20 minutes before everything came apart. She thought about the altar, about the vows in the small card in her left pocket, which she had written twice, discarding the first draft because it had been too careful, too measured, the words of a woman still protecting herself. The second draft was the true one. She thought about the room full of people who had watched her leave. To go back was not surrender, that was the thing. To walk back through those doors now, after everything that had just happened, was not to concede anything. The altar had been occupied by Madame Kang's certainty, by the aunt's cruelty, by everyone who had looked at her and thought, what is she doing here? And now it wasn't occupied by them anymore. The altar was empty, and it was hers. She held out her hand. Minjae placed the veil in it. Gloria moved without being asked. She took the veil from Valentina's hands and shook it once, lightly, the practiced shake of a woman who has handled delicate fabrics for 50 years, who knows exactly how much motion a thing needs before it settles correctly. The veil opened in the air. Gloria placed it on her daughter's head. Her fingers found the pearl comb and pressed it in, adjusting the angle twice with the same efficiency she had used on everything that had ever needed to be put right. Valentina stood. When the hall doors opened again, the guests rose. Not together, not at signal. Person by person, the way people rise when they understand something without being told what to understand. She walked the aisle alone. The train of the gown moved behind her across the floor. Minjae was at the altar. He had not moved since she had looked away. His vow, I don't just promise to love you. I promise never again to allow anyone to use my blood, my name, or my tradition as a weapon against you. Hers, and I promise never to accept love that asks me to diminish who I am. The officiant spoke. Minjae placed the ring. Later, near the main entrance of the hall, June Park stood with his hands clasped at his front. Watching the room, the music had started. Valentina was dancing with her father. Clarence Reese, in his rented navy suit, moving slowly, holding his daughter with both hands. Gloria sat in the front row watching them with her pearl brooch and her pale blue blazer, and the expression of a woman who has received more than she allowed herself to want. June had done nothing extraordinary tonight. He had observed, as always. He had retrieved something from the floor. He had carried it until the right person was ready to hold it. The veil had left the hall as wreckage. It came back as a crown. He supposed that was enough. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who should have protected you, and had to decide, in that exact moment, whether to walk away or walk back? Have you ever had your loyalty turned into a weapon against you? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, betrayal, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.